of Sperry H. Goodman.
About 10,000 years ago, people found that they didn't have to chase their food around all day. They could grow it right there where they were. It's called farming. And ever since then, we've been trying to control plants and animals for 3 good reasons: breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Now, how many cows do you think you'd see if they'd never been domesticated by humans? You ever seen a cow out in the wild fighting for its life? You think chickens will one day rise up and take over the world? No, I don't think so. Somewhere back in time, thousands and thousands of years ago, feeding ourselves changed from a little luck to a lot of science. We've been trying to improve that science ever since. Haven't we, ladies? In the United States, grocery shelves are filled with genetically modified food. Take a look at this corn. No blemishes, not a kernel out of place. Only in America, right? Well, not exactly. In Europe, if a food is genetically modified, it has to be labeled as such. Now, why is that? Is there something to be afraid of? Well, that's a good question, and one that's probably not asked often enough. We're getting more and more genetically modified food faster and faster. What is it? Do we need it? Is it safe? Well, let's have a look. Do you eat genetically modified food?
I don't know, do I?
You ever eat corn?
Yeah.
Corn is in the U.S. now, it's almost all modified.
Oh. I just thought corn grows, they pick it and you eat it.
What if I told you we could put a gene from a fish into a tomato and it keeps them from freezing? Would you eat that tomato?
Probably not.
Now, why do you say that?
Because it sounds fishy to me. Fish and tomato is kind of weird, but if I didn't know, I would probably eat it anyways.
Does it bother you?
I think it bothers me that we're stepping beyond normal boundaries, but I guess the food content and stuff that you're eating is probably the same.
I'm hoping that they're doing it for the better of the, you know, for my health, or for it to be edible for me.
If it's going to affect me as a human, my body, my system, then it's bad as hell.
Every living thing contains DNA, which includes chromosomes and genes. Now, genes provide the instructions to build a living thing. If you change one of the genes, you rewrite one of the instructions. So instead of Bill Nye the brown-eyed guy, you'd get Bill Nye with blue eyes. Some people think that would be a distinct improvement. But when we genetically modify our food, say by taking a gene from a fish and putting it in a tomato, we're creating a whole new species, one that's never existed on Earth before. So some would say, you've created a monster, a frankenfood. Others would say, no, it's still a fruit or a vegetable. I'm just making my lunch.
We're outside of Pullman, Washington, in wheat fields that we use for breeding.
Breeding wheat.
Breeding wheat. Wheat has been grown in an organized way for probably about 10,000 years. And the farmers in those 10,000 years improved the wheat a little bit each generation.
Are you trying to make wheat that will grow every year?
Wheat has a large gene base that we can work with. So a lot of wild relatives of wheat are available. Many of those are perennial, so they don't die each year. And we can make a cross between these perennial wild relatives and normal or domestic wheat, annual wheat, and produce lines that don't die each year.
So how do we make a hybrid?
The first step in making a hybrid or a cross is to emasculate. And what we mean by emasculate is to pull out the male parts of the flower.
Ouch, ouch.
And we're taking the male parts out of the wheat flower and turning it into a female.
So then do you do dozens or hundreds of plants at a time?
Over a year, we do hundreds or thousands of crosses.
All done by hand?
All done by hand. Manually go in with tweezers, pull out the anthers, introduce pollen from another plant. You have a hybrid seed, you grow that, and you produce a new variety of wheat.
It takes years and years.
It takes many years, so it takes a season just to get the hybrid, because you'll take that seed and plant that out the next year. It'll take a year to get that progeny, and it'll take 15 years or so to get a variety.
Do you, domesticated wheat, take this wild wheat to be your lawfully wedded hybrid? See, breeding food crops is a lot like a marriage, or a wedding, a shotgun wedding, because the wheat doesn't have much say in the matter. But traditional breeding of food crops takes plenty of human intervention. Agricultural scientists have been tinkering with our food for centuries. That's why most of the food you eat cannot be found in nature. So watermelon, tomatoes, plums, and corn bear little resemblance to their original natural species. But now scientists can take it another step. They can get rid of this wedding ceremony altogether and mix genes from species that are hardly related at all. So how does that go? Something old, something new, something borrowed, and something... There's nothing blue here.
Hey kids, how about some broccoli for dinner?
Yay!
Yes, you heard right. It used to be broccoli was always left on the plate. That's before I discovered DuSanto's new broccoli. It has all the vitamin and mineral goodness of regular broccoli, but now it's been genetically engineered to taste like cherry, kiwi, and new cola flavor. And it stays fresh in your refrigerator for months because they've added the gene of a special mushroom. A mushroom that has a vital nutrient. What kind of mushroom?
New broccoli. All of the goodness, none of the broccoli.
This is an organically grown papaya, a tropical fruit. This particular one is infected with the very common ring spot virus. Now, people eat papayas like this all the time. This is a papaya that's been genetically modified so that it has a tiny piece of the DNA from that very same ring spot virus embedded in its DNA. It's immune or resistant to ring spot infection. So which one do you want to eat? The natural one with lots of ring spot virus DNA, or the modified one with just a little bit of that very same DNA? It's the classic dilemma of natural versus modified. Is it good versus evil? Or is it just another step in the march of agricultural progress? So what exactly do you mean by transgenic?
Transgenic is a term that also means genetically engineered.
Across the genes, transgenic.
Transgenic. It means you can take a gene from another organism and put it into this organism. We're going to go right in here.
In here? I love it. Do I turn this on?
Yes.
So this is rice to rice. You're transferring genes from one rice plant to another rice plant.
Right.
How is that different from what a conventional rice farmer would do trying to hybridize rice?
We take a naturally occurring bacteria that normally in nature what it does is it infects the plants and it injects DNA into the plant. What molecular biologists have done is taken that bacteria and they take the genes out that this bacteria uses to cause disease and they put their genes of interest in. So that gene of interest can be anything. It could be from any organism. So then what we would do, we'd grow it to the adult plant stage and we would inoculate it and see if it's resistant to the bacteria.
If we make rice that is resistant to a certain naturally occurring bacterium, aren't you just going to eventually, say in a few decades, have new bacteria that are going to attack this different rice?
There's no way we can stop disease in humans or plants. So the way traditionally we have faced the challenge of developing resistance to disease is through genetic modification. Everything we eat has been genetically modified so that it carries a gene or genes for resistance. I think that people should pay close attention to genetic engineering, and although there are some fears and some legitimate risks with certain aspects of genetically engineered food, I think the benefits far, far outweigh the risks, especially in third world countries where there is tremendous poverty and disease and malnutrition. Vitamin A deficiency is a very serious disease. There's 500,000 children a year go blind due to their lack of vitamin A. And in fact, there's something like 1 to 2 million deaths every single year due to vitamin A deficiency. And rice, it turns out, has part of the pathway, the biochemical pathway for producing vitamin A, but it lacked 3 or 4 genes. So what this group did in Switzerland is they took these genes from other organisms, daffodil and bacteria, and they put those genes into rice. And this allowed rice now to make this provitamin A.
Welcome to Food Forum. I'm Chuck Chaplin, and our guest tonight is Wayne Hancock, president of the Genetically Enhanced Food Association, a research group funded by a number of companies working in this field. Mr. Hancock, can you tell us why the corporations you represent have made such a major investment in altering food at the genetic level?
To help people, Chuck. Plain and simple, we want to help people. You've heard of golden rice, haven't you?
Yes, you seem to work it into every one of your advertisements, but...
That's because we're proud of it. Did you know that 500,000 children in the third world go blind each year because of vitamin deficiencies? If they ate our rice, we could save all those children.
So it's about helping children.
That's right, Chuck.
One of your companies also put the gene from an Arctic fish into tomatoes.
Those fish don't freeze. You put that gene in tomatoes, and they don't freeze.
But isn't that kind of creepy? A fish gene in a tomato?
Well, it's not creepy when those tomatoes make it to the third world so the children have something to eat. And they can see those tomatoes. You know why? Because they're not blind.
It's just that it seems this technology is very dangerous.
It's dangerous when we run out of food. If we don't do this, we'll run out of food. Is that what you want?
No, I just think that what we need... What is that? Oh, my...
What? I told you to keep him away from me.
No, somebody boil some water.
Remain calm. He's just very delicious. He can't
some
wait
butter.
to share his
Have some butter.
Imagine being the farmer who grows corn that has been genetically engineered so that insects don't eat it. He doesn't have to spray as much pesticide. He saves money, and his crop is nearly chemical-free. If you were that farmer, you might want to grow that corn. But what about the effect of that crop on its environment? It can take years for a new organism to have an impact on an ecosystem. Not exactly the pace of business. Now corporations are developing more specialized, more complex strains of species that may be resistant to more diseases and more insects. It all sounds too good to be true. Is it? What exactly is BT? What gene was, it's named after a bacterium, right?
That's correct. When you hear BT corn, it refers to the bacteria Bacillus thuringiensis, which is a common soil bacteria, and it produces a protein that a certain type of insect doesn't like. And BT crops have been developed using biotechnology to take that single protein and put it into the plant, so the plants now have a natural built-in protection against these insect pests. In addition to insect-protected corn, there's another technology called herbicide-tolerant crops. And these are crops that have had a single gene inserted into them that allow those crops to withstand an application of a herbicide. And the value of those crops is that a farmer can now spray a herbicide over the top of those crops and control all the weeds that compete with that crop, kill the weeds, but leave the crop healthy and growing.
So how do we know that these products are safe?
That's a real area that's been investigated very, very extensively. And in fact, in the case of something like a herbicide-tolerant soybeans, it has been studied by 31 different regulatory agencies in 17 different countries around the world. And all of them have come to the same conclusion, that these new crops are as safe as the conventional version of those crops.
One small gene to feed a man, one giant feast for mankind. At least that's the idea behind genetically modified food. But the questions consumers are asking now is, when am I eating genetically modified food? Well, the answer? Probably more often than you think. These fruits and vegetables are organically grown. So is this cantaloupe. But the list of genetically modified versions of all of these foods is growing every day. Most soybean crops today are genetically modified, and soy derivatives appear in hundreds of food products. So you're probably serving genetically modified soy to your whole family, your dog, as well as your kids. See, baby food formulas commonly contain soy. Canola is used in lots of foods, like making margarine and cooking oil. So it's in dozens and dozens of processed foods, especially snacks. Genetically modified corn shows up on your breakfast table, in your cereal, at lunch, in your soup, at dinner, in your tacos, and even at dessert, in your cookies. There are scientists working to genetically modify coffee plants so that they only produce decaffeinated beans. It wouldn't be the Swiss process or the water process, there'd be no process. So genetically modified foods are probably here to stay. But you won't always know what you're eating just by looking at the label. The label may give you nutritional information, how many calories there are and so on, but you probably won't see the words genetically modified in the fine print. So do you think we should have labeling on genetically engineered foods?
Well, you know, if we label genetically engineered food, then we'd probably want to label that it was sprayed with pesticides. I think that it's important to know what it is that you're eating, and I think that it's a mistake to lump it all into one category. One could actually have a transgenic plant that didn't include the part that you eat. So maybe it's transgenic just in the leaves and you don't eat the corn leaf, or it's transgenic in the roots because you have root worms that, you know, hurt the plant through the roots. I find it upsetting that it's all one big category and it's all bad in many people's eyes when, in effect, they don't know what they don't like.
If we are what we eat, what are we eating? It's not so easy to tell. When scientists throw words around like hybrid, transgenic, GMO, and genetic engineering, they're not always talking about the same thing. There are different techniques using different organisms and different parts of the DNA. We end up with different kinds of food. If we want labels, where should we start? Should labels show up on all food that's been grown with pesticides? On all food that's been hybridized or genetically modified? It's worth thinking about because we, all of us, are the consumers, and we can demand it. But we need to know what we're talking about. So please take a moment to digest. It's quite a mouthful. So your cornfields were burned at one time, right?
They weren't burned, they were vandalized, and somebody came through and chopped them down with a sickle or something.
Why did they do that?
Well, they might have thought they were transgenic, even though they weren't, and I think the person who did it is just upset about genetic research in general, and that's another lumping together of there's GMOs, there's genetics, and it all sounds very bad to people who don't know what it is.
You see, genetically engineered food can provide vitamins, such as vitamin A, and also help reduce disease.
But, Mr. Sanders, what about allergic responses to these new substances being placed in our food?
And I read that genetic engineering could permanently alter ecosystems and even endanger certain species.
Yes, children, but who underwrites the science film?
New Foods Incorporated, makers of genetically engineered food.
Yes, so they've really got us by the shorts on this one.
By the...
Mr. Sanders, do you want us to lie?
It's just a little deception, Mary, like how your mother pretends to be a natural blonde.
Gee, Mr. Sanders, I used to admire you. What happened?
You'll see, Tommy.
Did life get you by the shorts, Mr. Sanders?
Yes, it did, Tommy. It sure did.
So what's wrong with introducing a new line of food crops? Is it going to upset the environmental apple cart? Well, in nature, everything's connected, so farm ecosystems are complex. If we introduce a new species, one thing you can count on is that the other species are going to respond. Modifying organisms is a way of modifying the world.
There hasn't been a case that's been won against nature in terms of breeders breeding in some type of resistance that doesn't break down. There's tremendous pressure on the insects and the plants to adapt.
Biotechnology will need some time for people to get comfortable. There are valid concerns being raised, but there is some excellent science being done to show that these crops are safe and that they're providing some tremendous benefits to large farmers in North America and Europe and to some small farmers around the world.
Corporations say that genetically modified food is the greatest thing, if I may, since sliced bread.
Right. I'm not saying that there couldn't be benefits from genetic modification. What I'm saying is there's a tremendous rush, again, just based on all-out greed, to get these things to market, to recoup their scientific investments in them. The problem with biotechnology and genetic modification is they're forcing this technology on problems that don't need technological solutions. Starvation is a great one. We hear that genetically modified crops are going to cure starvation on the planet. The real answer to curing starvation is reducing poverty, increasing infrastructure, and straightening out politics. So starvation is a great example. They're the ones that brought it up, not me. But they should be ashamed for bringing it up.
Because we have enough food, right?
There's 1.5 times the amount of food on the planet today that we need. If you look at any advances in any science, the main ones came through the free thought, free exchange of ideas, things like that. The ownership issues bother me. How can you own a wheat plant? How can you patent a wheat plant? How can you take something that's existed for 10,000 years, that farmers have improved for 10,000 years, stick a single gene into it, and you own it?
So what I'd like to develop is a new farming system called genetically engineered, organically grown. So we take advantage of this new technology and this tremendous amount of information we have now from sequencing of multiple genomes. Take that information, develop genetic tools that we can use to generate a new variety that can be grown in an integrated sort of management system using organic techniques.
I know what you're saying. You're saying, look, we've been genetically modifying crops for years, and we're fine. What's the worst that can happen? All right, try this. Let's say we genetically modify this corn so that when insects eat it, they die. Okay, then the wind blows some of the pollen from that corn over here into these weeds. Well, they're really wildflowers, and they're butterflies that rely on these flowers, and they eat some of that pollen, and all the butterflies die. Okay, so there's a whole summer without very many butterflies. Now, these are the rare butterflies that fly at night. So the bats that would normally feed on those butterflies can't get enough to eat for a whole summer. So they don't have nearly as much success at making bat babies. So that next summer, there aren't nearly as many bats around to eat the mosquitoes. Now, these are the mosquitoes that carry a deadly disease, and they feed on your blood, and they give you that disease, and then we all die. See, that would be bad. Now, I admit I made this up, but are scenarios like this possible? Or is this just alarmist hype? Now, we've been farming for 15,000 years, carefully breeding species at the pace of the seasons. But now it's possible to introduce a new species into the Earth's ecosystem, never before seen, practically overnight. And what's the hurry? It's not a race. We're the human race. So let's farm responsibly. Let's require labels on our foods, and let's carefully test these foods case by case. That's the way I see it. And I'll see you next time on The Eyes of Nye.
We've covered a lot of ground, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. Check out eyesofnye.org for more cool science.
major